With 3 months of tips hidden in a coffee tin and a mother dying in Detroit, Zara Williams thought she had finally escaped the nightmare of Marcus Chin's fists. But when her ex-boyfriend walked into the upscale Seoul restaurant where she worked, she realized some monsters never stopped hunting. That night, a Korean mafia boss named Park Jin-woo would ensure Marcus never hunted anyone again. At 24, Zara balanced serving trays at Lunar Garden with the impossible mathematics of survival. She made decent money at the high-end restaurant in Gangnam, enough to cover her tiny studio apartment and send what she could to her mother's mounting medical bills back home. Her natural hair was pulled into a sleek bun that complemented the restaurant's elegant atmosphere, and her steady hands never shook when carrying expensive wine to wealthy clientele. She'd learned to move with quiet efficiency, invisible until needed, a skill developed during 8 months of walking on eggshells around Marcus's unpredictable rage. The evening started like any other. Lunar Garden hummed with the controlled energy of Seoul's elite dining on perfectly plated Korean fusion cuisine. Zara moved between tables with practiced grace, refilling glasses and clearing plates while her mind calculated. Rent due in 10 days. Mother's next chemo treatment in 2 weeks. $300 still needed to keep the lights on in both places. She was surviving, barely, but surviving. Table 7 held a single customer who commanded attention without seeking it. The Korean man in his late 30s wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Zara made in 6 months. Dark hair swept back from sharp features, expensive watch catching light as he cut his steak with surgical precision. His presence carried weight, the kind that made other diners unconsciously lower their voices when passing his table. Park Jin-woo ate alone but never seemed lonely, dark eyes missing nothing as they surveyed the restaurant with calculated interest. "What can I get you tonight?" Zara had asked when seating him, notepad ready. "The executive menu," he replied, his English perfect despite the slight accent. "And keep the wine coming." She'd served him twice before over the past month. He tipped well, spoke politely, and never let his gaze linger inappropriately like some of the businessmen who thought foreign servers were part of the entertainment. Tonight he seemed more watchful than usual, those sharp eyes tracking the room's rhythm with predatory attention. The front door chimed at 9:15, 30 minutes before closing. Zara glanced up from polishing wine glasses behind the bar and felt her blood turn to ice water. Marcus Chin stood in the entrance, scanning the dining room with the same methodical intensity that used to precede his worst moments. 6 feet tall, athletic build maintained through obsessive gym sessions, wearing the expensive cologne that still made her stomach clench with muscle memory. She dropped behind the bar, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He couldn't have found her. She'd been so careful, paid cash for everything, used her middle name Simone on the apartment lease, told no one from her old life where she'd gone. But there he was, speaking to the hostess in his smooth voice, the one that had once whispered sweet promises before teaching her that love and terror could occupy the same space. Zara forced herself to stand, hands trembling as she gripped the bar edge. The hostess was seating him, at table 12. In her section, her legs moved without conscious command, carrying her toward disaster with the mechanical efficiency of months spent serving people she'd rather avoid. Marcus looked up as she approached, that familiar smile spreading across his features like oil on water. "Beautiful as always," he said, dark eyes tracking her body with possessive hunger. "Miss me, baby?" Her voice came out steady despite the chaos in her chest. "What can I get you to drink?" "Oh, I think you know exactly what I want." His hand shot out, fingers circling her wrist with bruising pressure. The grip that used to leave purple fingerprints for weeks, hidden under long sleeves and careful makeup. His thumb pressed against the pulse point, feeling her terror spike. "We need to talk. Outside." "I'm working," she replied, trying to pull away without causing a scene. The dining room suddenly felt enormous and impossibly small simultaneously, every eye in the place seeming to watch their interaction. Marcus's grip tightened until she gasped. "Don't make this difficult, Simone. You disappeared without a word. Left me worried sick. That's not like you." Across the restaurant, the man at table 7 had stopped eating, his dark eyes fixed on Marcus's hand wrapped around Zara's wrist, taking in her obvious distress with cold calculation. Something shifted in his posture, subtle but predatory, like a wolf deciding whether prey was worth the hunt. "Let go," Zara whispered, desperation creeping into her voice despite her efforts to stay calm. Marcus leaned closer, cologne overwhelming her senses. 3 months, baby. 3 months I've been looking for you. Did you really think I wouldn't find you eventually?" His grip moved to her forearm, fingers digging into flesh that remembered this exact pressure. "You belong to me." The man from Table 7 stood with fluid grace, expensive suit moving like liquid shadow as he approached. His footsteps carried authority that made conversations pause at nearby tables. "Excuse me," he said, voice carrying quiet command. "There seems to be a problem here." Marcus looked up, irritation flashing across his features. "No problem, friend. Just talking to my girlfriend." The Korean man's dark eyes moved between Marcus's grip on Zara's arm and the fear she couldn't quite hide. "She doesn't appear interested in conversation," he observed, tone neutral but somehow deadly. "Perhaps you should finish your meal and leave." "This isn't your business," Marcus snapped, standing to match the other man's height. His athletic frame looked suddenly inadequate next to the stranger's controlled presence. Park Jin-woo stepped closer, movements economical but threatening. "When someone hurts a woman in my presence, it becomes my business. Release her. Now." The dining room had gone completely quiet. Other patrons pretended to study their meals while straining to hear every word of the confrontation unfolding in their midst. Zara felt caught between two dangerous men, Marcus's familiar violence and this stranger's cold authority. Marcus finally released her arm, dark marks already blooming where his fingers had been. "Smart girl, running to Seoul," he said, eyes never leaving Jin-woo's face. "But you can't hide forever, baby. I always find what's mine." "She is under my protection now," Jin-woo stated, reaching into his jacket with deliberate slowness. His business card appeared between manicured fingers, expensive paper stock that felt substantial when Zara took it with shaking hands. "If you approach her again, we will have a very different conversation." Marcus laughed, sharp and bitter. "Protection. Right." He looked at Zara one last time, promise and threat written in equal measure across his features. "This isn't over, Simone. Not even close." He dropped money on the table and walked out, every line of his body radiating frustrated rage. The front door closed with a soft chime that sounded like a gunshot and the restaurants resumed quiet. Conversations slowly picked up as diners processed what they'd witnessed, most choosing to pretend nothing had happened. Zara stared at the card in her trembling hands. Park Jin-woo. Import and export. A phone number in elegant script. When she looked up, he was watching her with those calculating dark eyes, expression unreadable. "Thank you," she whispered, voice barely audible. He nodded once, formal and distant. "Be very careful, Miss Williams. Men like that don't give up easily." Her blood chilled. He knew her real name. Somehow, this dangerous stranger in expensive suits knew exactly who she was. Before she could ask how, he'd returned to his table, resuming his meal as if nothing had happened. But his eyes kept tracking the restaurant's entrance, watching for threats with predatory patience. Zara finished her shift in a haze of adrenaline and terror, jumping at every sound, expecting Marcus to return with reinforcements. The business card felt like a lifeline and a trap simultaneously, smooth paper promising salvation from a man who radiated danger like expensive cologne. Outside in the Seoul night, she walked to her apartment with shaking legs, wondering if she'd just traded one nightmare for another. Behind her, a sleek black sedan followed at a discreet distance, making sure she arrived safely. In the driver's seat, Park Jin-woo spoke quietly into his phone, giving instructions in rapid Korean that would ensure Marcus Chun faced consequences for putting his hands on someone now under protection. By morning, everything would be different. The next morning arrived with sirens and the acrid smell of smoke drifting through Seoul's morning air. Zara woke to her phone buzzing insistently, news alerts flooding the screen with reports of a mysterious explosion in Itaewon District. A luxury sedan had erupted into flames outside the Grand Hyatt at 3:17 a.m., witnesses describing a blast that shook windows 6 blocks away. No body was recovered, but hotel records confirmed the vehicle belonged to Marcus Chun, an American businessman who had checked out hours before the incident. Marcus was gone. Not missing, not injured, but completely erased from existence with the kind of efficiency that spoke of professional expertise. Zara sat on her narrow bed, staring at the news footage of twisted metal and scorched pavement, understanding with crystalline clarity that Park Jin-woo had kept his word in the most permanent way possible. Her hands trembled as she dressed for work, muscle memory from 8 months of hypervigilance screaming that this level of violence meant escalation, meant she was in deeper danger than ever. But underneath the terror ran something else, something that felt suspiciously like relief. Marcus would never grab her wrist again, never track her down with that possessive smile, never make her flinch at unexpected footsteps or sudden movements. Lunar Garden buzzed with subdued energy when she arrived for the afternoon shift. Staff clustered around phones, sharing footage and theories about the explosion that had dominated morning news cycles. The hostess, Mina, grabbed Zara's arm as she clocked in. "Did you see the news?" she whispered, eyes wide with excitement. "That American man from last night, the rude one who grabbed you. His car exploded. Like something out of a movie." Zara nodded, throat too tight for words. She'd seen it. She'd caused it by accepting a business card from a man whose protection came with a body count. The lunch service passed in a blur of automatic motions, serving food while her mind processed what it meant to be under the protection of someone capable of making people disappear overnight. Every sound made her jump. Every customer at table 7 made her heart race. But Marcus's particular brand of dread no longer lived in her chest. That specific fear had been burned away in a hotel parking lot, reduced to ash and twisted steel. Park Jin-woo arrived at 4:30, taking his usual corner table with the same controlled grace that had marked him as dangerous from their first interaction. Today he wore navy blue, impeccably tailored, his expensive watch catching afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. He ordered the same executive menu, same wine selection, but his dark eyes tracked her movements with new intensity. When she brought his appetizer, he spoke quietly, voice pitched so only she could hear. "How are you feeling today, Miss Williams?" "Fine," she replied automatically, then stopped. The lie felt inadequate when addressing someone who had eliminated her biggest problem with surgical precision. "Safer," she corrected, the word barely audible. "Good." His dark eyes searched her face, cataloging every micro-expression. "You understand what happened?" "It wasn't a question." Zara nodded, setting down his plate with steady hands that surprised her. She understood perfectly. Marcus had threatened someone under Park Jin-woo's protection, and Marcus no longer existed. The mathematics of that equation were brutally simple. "I didn't ask you to," she whispered, needing to establish that boundary even as gratitude and terror warred in her chest. "No." His voice carried no apology, no regret. "You didn't ask. But some threats require permanent solutions." The casual way he discussed murder made her stomach clench. This man ate expensive dinners and spoke perfect English, and had probably killed Marcus himself or given orders that accomplished the same result. She should be horrified, should quit her job and flee Seoul before becoming more entangled with someone capable of such violence. Instead, she found herself asking why. Because men like him never stop. His fingers traced the stem of his wine glass, movement economical and controlled. They escalate until someone gets seriously hurt or killed. Usually the woman. "How do you know?" Zara asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would explain the hollow look that sometimes crossed his features. "Experience." 2 words that carried enough weight to end the conversation. She returned to her other tables, serving businessmen and couples while processing the reality of her situation. Park Jin-woo had appointed himself her protector without consulting her, eliminated her ex-boyfriend with shocking efficiency, and seemed to expect nothing in return except her acceptance of the new paradigm. She should feel violated by his presumption, should resent having her choices made for her by a stranger with blood on his hands. But when closing time arrived and she walked out into Seoul's neon-lit night, without looking over her shoulder, without clutching her keys like weapons, without mapping escape routes from every shadow, Zara understood the terrible seduction of absolute protection. For the first time in 8 months, she felt safe. The black sedan materialized at the curb as she reached the street, engine purring with expensive precision. The rear window rolled down to reveal Park Jin-woo's sharp features, dark eyes reflecting streetlight like polished obsidian. "Get in," he said, tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Zara hesitated, hand on her apartment building's door handle. Getting in that car would cross a line she couldn't uncross. Would make her complicit in whatever he was, whatever he did, whatever happened next. The smart choice was to politely decline, go upstairs to her studio apartment, pretend the last 24 hours had been an elaborate nightmare. But Marcus was dead, and she was alive, and sometimes the smart choice was a luxury people in her situation couldn't afford. She got in the car. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne, nothing like the metallic scent of fear that had permeated Marcus's presence. Jinwoo sat across from her, perfectly pressed suit and controlled posture, making the spacious back seat feel intimate despite its size. "Where are we going?" she asked, noting the driver's military bearing and the subtle bulge under his jacket that suggested professional security. "Dinner." Jinwoo's tone indicated this was obvious. "You need to eat, and we need to establish parameters for your new situation." New situation, like her life, had become a business arrangement requiring terms and conditions. Zara supposed that's exactly what had happened when she accepted his business card instead of calling the police about Marcus's harassment. "What kind of parameters?" she asked, watching Seoul's lights blur past tinted windows. "The kind that keep you alive." His dark eyes fixed on her face, reading expressions like a manual he'd memorized. "You're under my protection now, Miss Williams. That comes with benefits and responsibilities." "I didn't agree to anything," she said, though they both knew she'd agreed to everything the moment she'd gotten in his car. "You agreed when you took my card. When you allowed me to handle your Marcus problem." His voice carried patient certainty, like he was explaining basic physics to a child. "Protection isn't a part-time arrangement." The car pulled up outside an exclusive restaurant in Gangnam, the kind of place that required reservations weeks in advance and charged more for appetizers than Zara made in tips most nights. A doorman approached immediately, opening her door with practiced deference that suggested he recognized the sedan and its occupant. "This is where we discuss your future," Jinwoo said, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy that contrasted sharply with the predatory calculation in his dark eyes. Zara took his arm, silk-lined wool of his jacket soft under her fingertips, and allowed herself to be escorted into a world where problems disappeared in parking lot explosions and protection came with price tags she couldn't yet comprehend. Behind them, the driver repositioned the car for quick departure, engine idling like a sleeping predator ready to wake at the first sign of danger. The hostess greeted Jinwoo by name, leading them to a private dining room with soundproofed walls and no windows. A place for conversations that required absolute discretion. As Zara settled into expensive upholstery and watched this dangerous man pour wine worth more than her monthly rent, she realized she'd crossed more than one line tonight. She'd entered Park Jinwoo's world completely, and there might be no way back to the woman who'd served tables and counted tips and dreamed of someday feeling safe. That woman had died in a hotel parking lot along with Marcus Chun, replaced by someone who sat across from a killer and wondered what came next. The private dining room felt like a boardroom designed for intimate negotiations, all dark wood paneling and soft lighting that flattered while concealing. Jinwoo sat across from her at a table that could have seated 8, expensive wine breathing in crystal glasses while servers delivered courses with silent efficiency. Each dish was a masterpiece of Korean fusion cuisine, but Zara barely tasted the food, too focused on the man who had eliminated her biggest problem with terrifying ease. He ate with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else, cutting each bite with surgical accuracy while dark eyes tracked her every microexpression. The silence stretched between them, weighted with unspoken negotiations and the metallic aftertaste of violence. When the servers withdrew after the main course, leaving them completely alone, Jinwoo finally spoke. "Tell me about your mother's condition," he said, dabbing his mouth with linen that probably cost more than Zara's weekly groceries. "Ovarian cancer. Stage 3. Zara's voice stayed steady despite the way her chest tightened whenever she thought about the medical bills mounting faster than her tips could cover them. "The treatments are working, but the costs are." "How much?" The directness shouldn't have surprised her. This was a man who made problems disappear overnight and spoke about murder like discussing weather patterns. Financial details would be equally straightforward for someone operating at his level. 80,000 so far. Another 60 projected for the next 6 months if the current protocol continues working. Her savings account balance flashed through her mind. $3,200 and change. Barely enough to cover 1 week of her mother's care. Jinwoo nodded as if those numbers meant nothing to him. Probably they didn't. Men who wore suits worth more than most people's cars operated in different financial universes entirely. And your current income covers what percentage of those costs? He asked, reaching for his wine with movements that suggested each gesture had been calculated for maximum efficiency. About 15%. Maybe 20 if I pick up extra shifts. The admission tasted bitter, highlighting exactly how impossible her situation had become. She was drowning in other people's expectations while trying to save someone who meant everything to her. So you're failing. Not cruel, just factual. A businessman identifying inefficiencies in a struggling operation. Yes, the word came out smaller than she intended, but at least it was honest. She was failing spectacularly, working herself to exhaustion while watching her mother's condition deteriorate, and the bills multiply like malignant cells. Jinwoo leaned back in his chair, studying her with those calculating dark eyes. I have a proposition for you, Miss Williams. A solution to your current difficulties that would benefit both of us. Here it was. The moment where accepting a business card and getting in his car led to whatever came next. Zara set down her fork and gave him her complete attention, knowing that whatever he offered would change everything forever. I need someone I can trust absolutely. Someone with intelligence, discretion, and personal motivation to maintain loyalty. His voice carried the formal tone of business negotiations, but underneath ran something warmer, more personal. You've demonstrated all 3 qualities. What kind of work? She asked, though they both knew the specifics mattered less than the fundamental question of whether she was willing to enter his world completely. Personal assistant for my legitimate business operations. Translation services when needed. Occasional social functions requiring professional companionship. Administrative tasks that require absolute confidentiality. His fingers traced patterns on expensive tablecloth while he spoke, movements hypnotic in their precision. The legitimate business operations phrase suggested there were illegitimate ones as well, but Zara had already accepted that reality when Marcus's car exploded. Men who made people disappear overnight didn't limit themselves to legal income streams. What would you pay? She asked, hating how mercenary the question sounded, but needing to understand the scope of what he was offering. $150,000 annually. Paid monthly. Your mother's medical expenses covered in full, immediately. Luxury apartment provided. All utilities included. Clothing allowance for professional wardrobe. Transportation as needed. The numbers hit her like physical blows. More money than she'd made in the last 3 years combined. Her mother's treatment secured without financial stress. An end to counting every dollar and weighing groceries against medical bills. What do you expect in return? She asked, because offers that generous came with prices that weren't always monetary. Complete loyalty. Absolute discretion about my business and personal affairs. You report only to me. Take direction only from me. Share confidential information with no one under any circumstances. His dark eyes held hers, making sure she understood the weight of what he was describing. Your time becomes my time when I require it. And if I refuse? Zara asked, though they both knew refusal would mean returning to an impossible situation with her mother's bills mounting and Marcus's threats eliminated but not forgotten. Then you return to your current life, but under my protection. No obligations, but also no benefits beyond ensuring your safety. Jinwoo's tone suggested this option was perfectly acceptable to him, though clearly not optimal. The generous interpretation was that he respected her autonomy enough to offer genuine choice. The realistic interpretation was that he'd already decided she would accept and was simply managing the negotiation to make her feel like an equal participant. What happens if I betray your trust? She asked, needing to understand the consequences before committing to something that felt increasingly like a life sentence. Then you lose everything immediately. The apartment, the salary, the medical coverage. His voice never changed tone, remaining conversational while discussing her potential destruction. More importantly, you lose my protection. In my world, Miss Williams, broken trust has consequences that extend far beyond financial hardship. The threat was elegantly phrased but unmistakable. Cross Park Jinwoo, and she'd find herself alone and vulnerable in a city where she'd already demonstrated her need for protection. Worse than that, she'd lose her mother's medical care and return to the crushing financial pressure that made every day a struggle for survival. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked, buying time while her mind processed the magnitude of what he was offering and demanding. "Tonight." His certainty was absolute. "This offer expires when you leave this restaurant. Accept now, or return to your current circumstances and make the best of them." The ultimatum should have felt manipulative, but instead it felt oddly respectful. No pressure campaign, no false deadlines designed to force hasty decisions. Just clear terms and a reasonable time frame for choice. Take it or leave it, but decide quickly, because powerful men didn't wait for struggling waitresses to weigh their options indefinitely. Zara stared at her hands, manicured nails that hid the calluses from years of service work, while her mind calculated the impossible mathematics of her situation. Stay independent and watch her mother die while drowning in debt, or accept protection from a killer and secure everything she needed to save the person who mattered most. The moral implications were staggering. Taking money from someone who solved problems through violence. Becoming complicit in whatever illegal activities funded his legitimate businesses. Trading her autonomy for security in ways that felt dangerously close to the possessive control she'd fled from Marcus. But Marcus had wanted to own her for his own gratification. Jinwoo was offering a business arrangement with clear benefits and defined parameters. The violence he'd demonstrated had been protective, not possessive. Professional, not personal. "I need guarantees," she said finally, looking up to meet his dark gaze. "About my mother's care. About the terms not changing arbitrarily. Contracts will be signed. Legal protections established." Jinwoo reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, expensive paper stock that felt substantial between her fingers. "Medical authorizations are already prepared. Your mother's oncologist has been contacted. Treatment costs approved through completion of current protocols." He'd researched her mother's condition and contacted her doctors before this dinner. Had prepared legal documents and financial authorizations while she was still processing Marcus's death. This wasn't a spontaneous offer, but a carefully orchestrated recruitment that had been planned since the moment she'd accepted his business card. The thoroughness should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like proof that he was serious about the arrangement, that this wasn't some impulsive gesture but a considered business decision with appropriate infrastructure already in place. "I accept," she said, voice steady despite the way her hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. "Smart choice." Jinwoo raised his wine glass in a toast that felt more like a contract signing than a celebration. "To mutually beneficial arrangements." She touched her glass to his, crystal singing against crystal like a bell marking the end of one life and the beginning of something entirely different. The wine tasted expensive and complex, with layers of flavor she'd never learned to identify properly. "When do I start?" she asked, because there was no point in pretending this was anything other than total commitment to his world. "Tomorrow. A car will collect you at 8 a.m. for apartment viewing. Your resignation from the restaurant will be handled professionally." His efficiency was both impressive and terrifying. "By evening, you'll be established in your new position." Zara nodded, understanding that she'd just signed away her independence to a man who made people disappear but also made dreams come true for those under his protection. The transaction felt as clean and brutal as everything else about Park Jinwoo, and she realized she was no longer the woman who'd served tables and counted tips and hoped for miracles. She was someone who sat across from killers and negotiated her future with clear eyes and steady hands. Someone who traded moral certainties for financial security and called it good business. The transformation had happened faster than Marcus's car exploding, but with equally permanent results. 3 months later, Zara Williams no longer counted tips or calculated grocery budgets or woke up in cold sweats about her mother's medical bills. Instead, she woke up in a luxury apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's skyline, Egyptian cotton sheets soft against skin that no longer bore the constant tension of financial desperation. The coffee maker was programmed to start at 6:30, grinding expensive beans that filled her kitchen with rich aroma while she checked her mother's latest test results on a tablet that had arrived with her signing bonus. The reports were excellent. Dr. Martinez in Detroit sent updates twice weekly now, detailed progress notes that painted a picture of steady improvement and optimism about long-term prognosis. Treatments proceeding without interruption, experimental protocols available if needed, no financial stress to complicate medical decisions. Her mother's voice during their daily calls had regained strength and hope that had been missing for months before Park Jin-woo entered their lives with his brutal efficiency and unlimited resources. Zara dressed carefully each morning in clothes that cost more than her previous monthly income, silk blouses and tailored pants from designers she'd only seen in magazines. The professional wardrobe had appeared in her apartment's walk-in closet like expensive magic, each piece selected to project competence and elegance while accommodating her natural curves with flattering precision. Jin-woo had excellent taste in everything, from real estate to wine to the women who worked closely with him. The black sedan arrived at 8:15 each morning, driver bowing slightly as he opened her door with military courtesy. Park Jin-woo owned a 30-story office building in Gangnam, where his legitimate import and export business occupied the top 5 floors, all glass and steel, an understated luxury that projected success without ostentation. Her office connected to his through a private door, soundproofed walls ensuring their conversations remained completely confidential. Her official duties were exactly what he'd described during their dinner negotiation. Translating business correspondence between English and Korean, managing his appointment calendar, organizing social functions that required professional hostess skills, handling administrative tasks that couldn't be delegated to regular staff. The work was intellectually engaging and surprisingly varied, from coordinating art acquisitions to reviewing contracts for shipping ventures that moved legitimate cargo through Asian ports. She never asked about the illegitimate businesses that certainly existed alongside the legal ones. Never questioned why certain meetings were scheduled in private locations with no records kept, or why some visitors were escorted through service elevators directly to Jin-woo's office without passing reception. Her job was discreet assistance and absolute silence, both of which she provided with growing competence and confidence. But beyond the professional arrangement, something else had developed between them during long days of shared workspace and quiet efficiency. Jin-woo was nothing like the cold criminal she'd expected based on Marcus's explosive elimination. He remembered she preferred tea to coffee, ensuring the break room was always stocked with expensive Earl Grey and delicate honey imported from New Zealand apiaries. He noticed when she worked through lunch, ordering food from restaurants she'd mentioned liking and having it delivered with handwritten notes suggesting she needed to maintain her strength for optimal performance. His consideration extended to details she'd never voiced. When Seoul's summer humidity made her natural hair unpredictable, high-end styling products appeared in her office bathroom without explanation or fanfare. When she mentioned missing certain American foods during casual conversation, they materialized in the executive kitchen the following week. He paid attention with the same intensity he applied to business negotiations, cataloging her preferences and addressing her needs before she recognized them herself. The man who had eliminated Marcus Chun with surgical precision also possessed unexpected gentleness in daily interactions. He never raised his voice, never displayed impatience when she asked questions about Korean business customs, never made her feel stupid for not understanding cultural nuances that were second nature to him. Instead, he taught her with patient explanations and subtle corrections that educated without embarrassing. "What does this phrase mean exactly?" she asked one afternoon, pointing to correspondence from a shipping company in Busan. "Respectful request for expedited processing." Jin-woo leaned over her shoulder to read the document. Expensive cologne mixing with the faint scent of coffee that clung to his perfectly pressed shirt. But the underlying tone suggests urgency beyond normal business needs. His proximity made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. Close enough to feel warmth radiating from his body, to notice the precise way his dark hair was styled away from sharp features that remained compelling even after months of daily exposure. Close enough to remember he was a man, not just an employer who had rescued her from impossible circumstances. "How can you tell?" she asked, voice slightly breathless from awareness that had been building between them despite her efforts to maintain professional boundaries. Experience reading between lines. His dark eyes met hers, something shifting in their depths that acknowledged the tension crackling between them. People rarely say what they mean directly, especially in business. Or in life, she replied, the words carrying more weight than intended. Especially in life. His gaze lingered on her mouth for a heartbeat too long before he straightened, returning to his desk with movements that seemed carefully controlled. These moments happened more frequently as autumn arrived in Seoul, small exchanges that carried subtext neither of them acknowledged directly. Jinwoo would catch her staring during meetings, dark eyes holding hers until she looked away with heat rising in her cheeks. She would find excuses to bring him coffee or documents, lingering beside his desk while they discussed business matters that could have been handled through email. The professional relationship had evolved into something more personal through shared meals and late evenings when they were the only people remaining in the office. Jinwoo worked long hours with the same intensity he applied to everything else, and Zara found herself staying late as well, partly from dedication to her new responsibilities and partly from reluctance to leave his company for the solitude of her expensive apartment. "You don't have to stay so late every night," he said one October evening as rain drummed against floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Seoul's glittering lights. "Your contract specifies standard business hours unless special circumstances require additional availability." "I know." She looked up from the social calendar she'd been organizing for his upcoming charity gala. "But I like the work. I like feeling useful." "You are useful." His voice carried conviction that made her chest warm with pride. "More than useful. You've become indispensable." The compliment affected her more than it should have, considering their relationship was fundamentally transactional. But the way he said it, with quiet sincerity and direct eye contact, made it feel personal rather than professional. Made her remember that underneath the business arrangement and grateful dependence, she was a woman and he was a man who had never made her feel anything but safe and valued. "Tell me about your family," she said one evening when they'd finished reviewing quarterly reports and opened a bottle of wine that probably cost more than her previous apartment's monthly rent. "I know you had a sister." His expression shifted, carefully maintained composure cracking slightly around the edges. "Minji, 2 years younger than me. Everything good about our family concentrated in one person while I inherited all the darkness." "What happened to her?" Zara asked gently, understanding this was dangerous territory, but needing to know what had shaped the man who eliminated threats with such decisive violence. "She fell in love with the wrong person." Jinwoo swirled wine in his glass, dark liquid catching light like blood. "Someone who seemed charming and successful, but turned out to be possessive and violent. By the time our family recognized the signs, it was too late." The parallel to her own situation with Marcus wasn't lost on either of them. Zara reached across the space between their chairs, fingers brushing his hand in a gesture of comfort that felt natural despite the professional boundaries they'd maintained. "I was building my empire then," he continued, voice rough with emotion he rarely displayed. "Too focused on power and territory, and proving myself worthy of inheriting our family's legacy. I didn't notice she needed help until I got the call from the hospital." "What call?" she whispered, though part of her already knew the answer would explain the hollow look that sometimes crossed his features during quiet moments. "That she was dead. That Kim Sung-ho had beaten her so severely that emergency surgery couldn't save her. That while I was negotiating shipping contracts and expanding our influence, my sister was being murdered by a man who claimed to love her." The words hung between them like ghosts, heavy with guilt and loss that had clearly shaped everything Jinwoo had become since that phone call. Zara understood now why he'd intervened with Marcus so decisively, why he'd offered protection without being asked, why he couldn't ignore women in dangerous situations. "I'm sorry," she said, inadequate words that carried genuine sympathy for pain she could see etched in the sharp lines of his face. She was everything bright and hopeful in the world. Jinwoo looked directly at her, dark eyes holding vulnerability she'd never seen before. "Like you. Strong enough to survive impossible situations, kind enough to care about people who don't deserve it, brave enough to take risks when necessary." The comparison made her breath catch, not just because he'd called her bright and hopeful, but because she could see in his expression that she'd become more than an employee or protected asset. She'd become something precious to a man who had lost precious things before and never forgiven himself for failing to protect them. "You didn't fail her," Zara said, voice soft with conviction. "You couldn't have known." "I should have known." His hand turned under hers, fingers intertwining with surprising gentleness. "I should have been watching instead of building. Should have been brother instead of businessman." The contact sent electricity through her entire nervous system, awareness crackling between them with dangerous intensity. His hand was warm and strong, calloused from activities that had nothing to do with office work. "I have to go," he said after ending the conversation, voice carefully neutral. "Emergency meeting with the Busan Shipping Consortium. Could be several hours." "Of course." Zara's own voice sounded strangely normal despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'll finish the gala preparations and lock up." He nodded, gathering his jacket and briefcase with efficient movements that betrayed nothing of what had almost happened between them. But at the door he paused, looking back with expression that promised they would finish this conversation eventually. When he was gone, Zara sat alone in the expensive silence of his office, fingertips touching her lips and wondering what it meant that she wanted to kiss a man who solved problems through violence. What it meant that his protection had evolved into something that felt dangerously close to the possessive devotion she'd fled from Marcus. Except this time, she found herself hoping it was exactly what it seemed. The first sign came on a Thursday morning when Zara noticed the same dark SUV parked across from her apartment building for the third consecutive day. Different position, different time, but unmistakably the same vehicle with tinted windows that reflected Seoul's autumn sunlight like black mirrors. She mentioned it casually to Jinwoo during their morning coffee, expecting him to dismiss her concerns as paranoia left over from Marcus's months of stalking behavior. Instead, his entire demeanor shifted with predatory alertness that reminded her exactly what kind of man she worked for. His dark eyes sharpened, focused intensity that made the air in his office feel suddenly charged with danger. "Describe the vehicle exactly," he said, setting down his coffee with movements that had gone perfectly still. "Black Hyundai SUV, recent model, heavily tinted windows. License plate partially obscured by mud, but I caught the first 3 characters." She recited the information with surprising accuracy, muscle memory from months of hypervigilance during her relationship with Marcus having trained her to notice potential threats automatically. Jinwoo was already reaching for his phone, speaking rapid Korean to someone who answered on the first ring. His voice carried authority that brooked no argument, crisp commands that suggested mobilization of resources she'd only glimpsed peripherally during their months of working together. "You're not going home tonight," he said after ending the call. "Or tomorrow. My security team will collect your essentials and bring them to a safe location." The casual way he rearranged her life should have irritated her, but instead Zara felt relief that someone was taking the threat seriously. Marcus had taught her that being followed meant escalation was coming, that surveillance preceded action with inevitable progression toward violence. "Who would be watching me?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer involved Jinwoo's less legitimate business interests. "People who want to pressure me through someone I care about." His admission that he cared about her sent warmth through her chest despite the circumstances. It's an old tactic, effective against men who have emotional vulnerabilities. The phrasing suggested he'd been in similar situations before, that protecting people he cared about was a recurring challenge in his dangerous world. Zara wondered how many others had required safe houses and security details, then decided she didn't want to know the answer. The second sign came Friday evening when her apartment building's lobby phone rang at 3 in the morning. She answered groggily, expecting a wrong number or drunk dial from someone's misadventure in Hongdae's nightclub district. "We know where you live," a male voice said in accented English before the line went dead. Sleep became impossible after that. Zara sat by her living room windows, watching the street below for movement while her heart hammered with adrenaline that made coffee unnecessary. The security detail Jinwoo had assigned wasn't visible, but she trusted they were positioned somewhere in the darkness, professional watchers keeping her safe from amateur stalkers. When her phone buzzed at 6 a.m. with a text from an unknown number, her blood turned to ice water. The message contained a single photograph, her walking into Jinwoo's office building yesterday morning. expensive clothes and confident posture marking her as someone whose disappearance would cause significant distress to the man who employed her. She forwarded the image immediately, knowing Jinwoo would be awake despite the early hour. His response came within minutes. Terse instructions to stay inside until his driver arrived, and to pack nothing because everything she needed would be provided wherever he was taking her. The safe house was a fortress disguised as a luxury residence. All reinforced walls and sophisticated security systems hidden behind elegant architectural lines in one of Seoul's most exclusive neighborhoods. Jinwoo met her at the door with expression that promised violent retribution for whoever had threatened someone under his protection. "How serious is this?" she asked, setting down the overnight bag his security team had packed while she waited in the car. "Serious enough that I'm considering permanent solutions rather than negotiation," he replied, voice carrying the cold certainty she'd heard the night Marcus's car exploded. The living room had been converted into a command center, multiple phones and laptops displaying information she couldn't read but recognized as intelligence gathering on a massive scale. Jinwoo moved between devices with systematic efficiency, making calls in Korean and English and what sounded like Japanese, coordinating responses to threats that had materialized around her like storm systems. "Who are they?" she asked, needing to understand what had made her a target worth kidnapping. "Yamashita Syndicate from Osaka. They want to pressure me into accepting unfavorable terms for shipping routes through Japanese ports." His explanation was matter-of-fact, discussing international organized crime like quarterly earnings reports. Taking someone I value creates leverage for negotiation. The phrase, "someone I value," made her chest tighten with emotions that had nothing to do with fear. 3 months of careful professional boundaries and growing personal connection had led to this moment, where Jinwoo publicly acknowledged she meant something to him beyond efficient administrative assistance. "What kind of unfavorable terms?" she asked, because understanding the stakes might help her process the magnitude of danger she'd stumbled into. "The kind that would cost my family millions annually, while giving them access to smuggling routes we've controlled for decades." His dark eyes met hers across the improvised command center. "The kind of arrangement that looks like negotiation but functions as surrender. So they took me to force your hand. They tried to take you." Jinwoo's voice dropped to dangerous register that made her pulse spike with primitive recognition of apex predator energy. The attempt failed, but the intent was clear enough. Before she could ask for details about the failed attempt, alarms started screaming throughout the house with electronic urgency that suggested immediate breach of security perimeter. Jinwoo moved with liquid grace, producing a pistol from somewhere inside his tailored jacket while speaking rapid commands into his phone. "Stay down," he ordered, pushing Zara behind expensive furniture that probably wouldn't stop bullets, but might provide psychological comfort during whatever came next. The front door exploded inward with concussive force that rattled windows and sent expensive artwork crashing to marble floors. Masked figures poured through the breach, automatic weapons tracking targets with professional precision that suggested military training rather than common criminals. Zara crouched lower, heart hammering against her ribs while gunfire echoed through rooms that had been peaceful luxury moments before. She could hear Jinwoo's voice shouting instructions to security personnel, controlled commands that cut through chaos with authority that demanded immediate obedience. The panic button he'd given her was clipped inside her jacket pocket, sophisticated device that would summon additional resources if primary defenses failed. She pressed it now, feeling the brief vibration that confirmed signal transmission while bullets shattered glass somewhere above her head. A hand grabbed her shoulder with bruising force, dragging her upright despite her attempts to stay hidden behind furniture that offered illusory protection. The masked man spoke Japanese, harsh commands she didn't understand but recognized as demands for cooperation. Zara drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus with force learned from self-defense classes she'd taken after finally escaping Marcus's fists. The attacker's breath whooshed out in surprised pain, his grip loosening enough for her to twist away and run toward where she'd last seen Jinwoo's position. Behind her, the man shouted something that brought answering calls from his associates, pursuit that made her legs pump faster across marble floors slick with debris from the explosive entry. She could hear Jinwoo's distinctive voice somewhere ahead. controlled fury that promised lethal consequences for whoever had violated his protection. The gunfire stopped with sudden finality that felt more ominous than the violence preceding it. Zara pressed herself against expensive wallpaper, breathing hard while listening for sounds that might indicate whether Jinwoo had survived the assault or joined the casualties scattered throughout rooms that had been elegant and peaceful an hour earlier. Zara. His voice carried relief and rage in equal measure. Where are you? Here, she called back, voice shaking with adrenaline that made standing difficult. Are they gone? Some of them. Jinwoo appeared around a corner with blood on his expensive shirt, an expression that promised the survivors would wish they'd died with their colleagues. His dark eyes tracked her from head to toe, cataloging possible injuries with protective intensity that made her feel precious despite the circumstances. Are you hurt? He asked, hands framing her face with gentleness that contrasted sharply with the controlled violence still radiating from his posture. No, just scared. Her voice came out smaller than intended, honest admission that she'd been terrified not just for herself, but for him, for the possibility that his protection might cost him everything. Good. He pulled her against his chest, expensive cologne mixing with smoke and cordite that clung to fabric damaged by proximity to explosions. You did well. Fighting back, using the panic button, staying mobile instead of freezing. The praise affected her more than it should have, validation from someone whose approval had become increasingly important over months of shared workspace and growing emotional connection. She felt safe in his arms despite evidence of violence surrounding them, protected by someone whose willingness to use force ensured her freedom from fear. This is my fault, she said, guilt settling over her like cold water. They took me to hurt you. No. His voice carried absolute conviction that brooked no argument. This is business. They chose to make it personal by threatening someone under my protection. That was their mistake. The possessive way he said someone under my protection made her pulse quicken with awareness that had nothing to do with residual adrenaline from the attack. She was his to protect, his to value, his to care about in ways that transcended professional arrangements and approached something far more personal. I was terrified something would happen to you, she admitted, honesty spilling out before caution could stop her. Not just because I need your protection, but because you what? He asked softly, dark eyes searching her face for confirmation of feelings that had been building between them for months. Because I love you. The words came out simply, honestly, without dramatic flourishes or romantic orchestration. Just truth spoken in expensive ruins by someone who discovered that caring about a dangerous man felt natural despite every logical objection. Jinwoo's expression shifted, carefully maintained composure cracking to reveal vulnerability that matched her own. I love you too, he said, voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed anyone to see. More than I should. More than is safe for either of us. The admission hung between them like bridge across dangerous territory, acknowledgement that their professional arrangement had evolved into something neither had planned but both wanted despite the complications it created. When he kissed her, it tasted like smoke and desperation and relief that they'd both survived to reach this moment. His hands tangled in her hair, expensive styling products no longer maintaining perfect professional appearance as passion overcame the careful boundaries they'd maintained for months. You're mine now, he breathed against her lips, possessive declaration that should have frightened her but instead felt like coming home. Completely and forever. And you're mine, she replied, claiming him with equal conviction. Broken pieces and all. The gunfire had stopped, but sirens wailed in the distance, emergency responders summoned by neighbors who'd heard explosions in one of Seoul's most exclusive districts. Jinwoo straightened, professional mask sliding back into place as he calculated next moves in a situation that required immediate action. I have to end this tonight, he said, voice carrying cold determination that promised the Yamashita Syndicate would regret targeting someone he loved. Permanently. No negotiations, no compromises, no half measures. Zara nodded, understanding that loving Park Jinwoo meant accepting the violence that kept his world functioning. Meant trusting that his protective fury would eliminate threats completely rather than leaving them to escalate into future danger. Be careful, she said, because even dangerous men could be killed by other dangerous men if they underestimated the stakes or overestimated their own capabilities. Always. He kissed her once more, fierce and possessive, before disappearing into Seoul's neon-lit night to ensure no one would ever threaten her again. Dawn broke over Seoul with sirens still echoing through expensive neighborhoods and news helicopters circling locations that had hosted violence overnight. Zara woke to reports flooding her phone screen, headlines describing coordinated strikes against Yamashita syndicate operations throughout the city. Multiple arrests at shipping facilities, key figures disappeared without trace, financial assets frozen by authorities who had received anonymous tips about illegal activities requiring immediate investigation. The Osaka Syndicate's Seoul operations had been dismantled with surgical precision that left no doubt about who orchestrated their destruction. Warehouses raided, safe houses compromised, communication networks severed, leadership structure collapsed like a building with dynamited foundations. By the time morning news cycles began reporting the overnight chaos, the organization that had threatened Zara's safety no longer existed in any meaningful capacity. Jinwoo returned to the secure apartment at 8 a.m. Expensive suit rumpled and dark hair slightly disheveled, but otherwise appearing remarkably composed for someone who had spent the night eliminating an international criminal organization. He carried the faint scent of smoke and cold night air, evidence of activities conducted in shadows where problems were solved permanently through methods that left no witnesses. "Is it finished?" Zara asked, though his satisfied expression already provided the answer she needed. "Completely." His voice carried quiet certainty that brooked no doubt about the thoroughness of his response to threats against someone under his protection. The Yamashita Syndicate no longer operates in Korean territory. Their leadership has been neutralized or arrested. Their assets have been seized or redistributed to more cooperative organizations. "What happened to the men who attacked us last night?" she asked, because understanding the scope of his retaliation would help her process the magnitude of protection he provided. They discovered that threatening Park Jinwoo's woman comes with consequences that extend far beyond their original intentions. His dark eyes held hers, reading her reaction to being called his woman with possessive satisfaction that made her pulse quicken. Some lessons can only be taught once. The euphemism was elegant but unmistakable. The men who had broken into their safe house would never threaten anyone again, eliminated with the same efficiency that had removed Marcus from her life months earlier. Jinwoo protected what belonged to him through methods that ensured permanent solutions rather than temporary deterrence. "You said I was your woman," she observed, testing the implications of that declaration now that immediate danger had passed. "You are my woman." His certainty was absolute. No hesitation or qualification in the statement that claimed her completely. "Yesterday's attack proved that anyone who threatens you threatens me. That makes you family, not just someone under my protection." The distinction was crucial in his world, where protection could be purchased but family loyalty was earned through blood and sacrifice. Being his woman meant belonging to Park Jinwoo in ways that transcended business arrangements and approached the kind of possessive devotion she'd once fled from Marcus, but now recognized as love expressed through dominance. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked, needing to understand the parameters of belonging to someone whose love came with bodyguards and the occasional elimination of threats. "It means you're mine forever, not just until your mother's medical bills are paid or your situation improves." His hands framed her face with reverent tenderness that contrasted sharply with the controlled violence he'd demonstrated throughout the night. "It means I take care of you, protect you, provide for you, and ensure nothing ever hurts you again." "And in return," she prompted, though she already understood the fundamental exchange that had been evolving between them for months. "You give me your loyalty, your trust, your love, and your life." His dark eyes searched her face, reading every micro-expression for signs of hesitation or fear. "You become part of my family, which means you accept the responsibilities and dangers that come with that position." The offer was everything she dreamed of during months of growing attraction and emotional connection. But accepting it would mean crossing the final line between normal life and the dangerous world where problems were solved through violence and love was expressed through possession. "I want to marry you," he continued, voice carrying formal weight that transformed casual conversation into life-altering proposal. "Not just live together or maintain our current arrangement, but legal marriage that makes you officially part of my family structure. The proposal should have felt sudden, but instead it seemed like inevitable progression from protection to love to permanent commitment. 3 months of shared workspace and growing intimacy had led to this moment where he offered everything she'd never dared hope for with someone whose devotion came with absolute security. "Yes," she said, voice steady despite the way her heart hammered with excitement and residual adrenaline from their recent crisis. "I want to marry you too." Relief transformed his sharp features, careful composure softening into genuine smile that made him look younger and less dangerous despite the blood on his expensive shirt. He produced a ring from his jacket pocket, obviously prepared for this conversation despite the dramatic circumstances that had precipitated it. The diamond was flawless and enormous, set in platinum that caught Soul's morning light like captured starfire. Old-fashioned elegance that projected wealth and status while maintaining sophisticated taste that reflected his personality perfectly. The kind of ring that announced to everyone who saw it that she belonged to someone with unlimited resources and traditional values about claiming what he loved. "When did you buy this?" she asked as he slipped it onto her finger with movements that suggested he'd been planning this moment for longer than last night's crisis. "2 weeks ago, when I realized I couldn't imagine my life without you in it." His admission that he'd been planning proposal before threats materialized made her chest warm with emotion that had nothing to do with gratitude for protection. "I was waiting for the right moment to ask." Getting attacked by rival syndicate wasn't the right moment, she observed, though the ring felt perfect on her finger despite the unconventional circumstances of its presentation. "The right moment was when we both realized we'd rather die defending each other than live safely apart." His voice carried conviction that made the dramatic phrasing feel like simple truth. Everything else was just timing. The observation was accurate. Yesterday's crisis had stripped away careful boundaries and revealed feelings that had been building for months beneath professional courtesy and mutual attraction. They loved each other enough to fight for survival, enough to claim possession regardless of danger, enough to build permanent commitment on foundation of shared violence and absolute trust. "What happens now?" she asked, because accepting his proposal would require planning and logistics that extended far beyond romantic gesture. "Now we get married quickly and legally, establishing your position in my family structure before anyone else decides to test my protection." His efficiency was both romantic and practical, love expressed through systematic elimination of potential threats. "Then we honeymoon somewhere beautiful while I finish restructuring shipping operations to prevent future challenges." The combination of wedding planning and business consolidation was perfectly representative of who Jin Woo was, someone who managed romance and violence with equal competence while ensuring the people he loved remained absolutely safe. "Where would you want a honeymoon?" she asked, because normal couples discussed vacation preferences even when one of them had just eliminated an international criminal organization to protect the other. "Maldives. Private island, perfect security, excellent room service." His dark eyes held warmth that transformed sharp features into something approachable despite his dangerous reputation. "Somewhere you can wear expensive bikinis and I can forget about business for 2 weeks." The mental image of Jin Woo in vacation mode, relaxed enough to ignore phone calls and delegate authority to subordinates, was almost impossible to reconcile with the man who had methodically destroyed everyone who threatened her. But love apparently made even deadly efficient criminals want normal experiences like honeymoons and room service. "I love you," she said, honesty that needed no elaborate phrasing or romantic orchestration. Just truth spoken by someone who had discovered that being claimed by dangerous man felt like coming home rather than losing freedom. "I love you too." He kissed her with possessive tenderness, expensive cologne mixing with lingering traces of smoke that clung to fabric damaged by proximity to violence. "More than my empire, more than my reputation, more than anything I've built or conquered." The declaration carried weight that extended beyond romantic hyperbole. Jin Woo had spent years building criminal empire that commanded respect throughout Asian organized crime, but he'd risk all of it to keep her safe. That kind of devotion was both terrifying and intoxicating, love expressed through willingness to sacrifice everything else for one person's protection. When they broke apart, Seoul's morning light streamed through windows that overlooked city where Marcus Chun had once hunted her with possessive fury and threats of violence. That terrified waitress felt like distant memory now, replaced by a woman who wore engagement ring worth more than most people's houses and accepted protection from man who eliminated problems through methods that left no survivors. The transformation was complete. From counting tips and calculating grocery budgets to planning weddings and honeymoons with someone whose love came with bodyguards and occasional elimination of threats. From flinching when abusive ex-boyfriend entered restaurant to standing confidently beside man who had ensured no one would ever hurt her again. Her phone rang with familiar ringtone that indicated her mother calling from Detroit. Dr. Martinez had scheduled another progress meeting, routine check that would confirm continued improvement and optimistic prognosis for long-term survival. Medical bills that had once seemed insurmountable were now handled automatically. Treatment decisions made based on optimal care rather than financial constraints. "Mom," she answered, voice bright with happiness that had nothing to do with relief from recent danger and everything to do with secure future stretching ahead like promise of permanent safety. "Sweetheart." Her mother's voice carried strength that had returned gradually over months of proper treatment and reduced stress about financial survival. "How are you doing in Seoul?" "I'm getting married," Zara announced, surprising herself with how natural the words sounded despite their recent engagement under dramatic circumstances. Her mother's delighted response filled the apartment with warmth, questions about wedding plans and future husband that she answered while Jinwoo listened with satisfied expression that suggested he approved of family integration proceeding smoothly. When the call ended, they sat together in expensive silence that felt peaceful despite evidence of recent violence scattered throughout rooms that would be cleaned and repaired by professionals who specialized in eliminating traces of criminal activity. "No more counting tips," Jinwoo observed, dark eyes tracking her face for signs of nostalgia or regret about leaving her previous life behind. "No more counting anything." Zara leaned against his shoulder, engagement ring catching light like captured stars while sirens faded in distance, and Seoul resumed normal rhythm of commerce and ambition. "No more being afraid of footsteps or sudden movements or men who think love justifies violence." The irony wasn't lost on either of them that she'd found safety with man who used violence professionally, but Jinwoo's methods served protection rather than possession, elimination of threats rather than creation of them. His darkness kept her light safe, his empire ensured her freedom from fear, his love provided security that felt like home rather than prison. 6 months ago, she'd been waitress who flinched when Marcus Chin walked into restaurant where she worked, terrified woman planning escape from man who claimed to love her while teaching her that love and terror could occupy same space. Tonight she would sleep in luxury apartment beside man who had eliminated every threat to ensure she never had to flinch again. The transformation was complete, and it was perfect.